What's something your therapist said that was life changing? The anxiety you're feeling is not evil or your enemy. It's an overprotective friend trying to keep you safe because it once saw you hurt. Do not fight it. Prove it wrong. Story 2. I asked him, how do you process all the negative feelings that are projected at you? And he said, they aren't my feelings. I don't think he realized how profound that was. This in particular is very powerful. One thing that I myself had to learn, and that if you're still struggling with like self-image and stuff like that, is that you're never going to make everybody happy. You just have to authentically be yourself, and the people that you want in your life are going to love and support you, and the people that don't, they can say their piece and then you just move on, right? You can't control how other people perceive you. And so I know there are people on here that don't like some of the comments I say, whatever, and that's totally fine. We can agree to disagree, but as long as we keep it respectful, we don't have to let each other's opinions ruin our day, so to speak. Story 3. Not every friend has to be a close friend. You're able to have different kinds of friends, like levels of how close they are or how much you confide in them. I struggle with being a loner, and it affected my mental health a lot because I could count my friends on one hand. I thought of people as acquaintances or close friends with no gray area. This advice helped me appreciate more of the people who I'm not super close with, but they still have a presence in my life. Story 4. As a teen in therapy, I used to call myself a potato because of my ugly appearance. The woman I had sessions with actually gave me a small plastic potato replica and written on it in Sharpie, "Some people like potatoes." I think it was just the effort she went to trying to help me/cheer me up that really affected me in my judgment of professional help. I was an angsty kid, and after that, I took getting help much more seriously. Story 5. The way your parents died will never be the most interesting thing about you. It's not even the most interesting thing about them. My parents died from self-unaliving together, and I was worried that it was going to consume me as an individual. I didn't want their deaths or my grief to become my entire identity. My brother was worried that he was doomed to repeat what my parents did. What was the point of fighting it? His therapist told him, "You're the culmination of millennia of genes and family experiences. You could take over the story of a relative who was hardy, resilient, and brave. Your parents are not the only people you're related to." Story 7. You aren't that interesting. I would have panic attacks and paranoia that people were out to get me, PTSD, etc., and would think that people were judging me in grocery stores because my toddler was crying or that my hair was messy. And honestly, it boiled down to nobody cares. We're all trying to survive and get through the day, and what someone looks like or does, we observe and move on. Nobody is that interesting. Nobody, for the most part, is going to remember the toddler crying for a brief moment, or the way I was dressed, or if my makeup was perfect. Nobody. The only person who will remember is me, and how I made myself feel. Just to piggyback on this, I totally agree completely. I think oftentimes, especially when it comes to our image or our appearance, we put a lot more stock in what we think people are going to think of us, rather than just learn how to value ourselves. And in the process, you kind of psych yourself out. And like they said, not in a rude way, but like nobody cares in the sense that you're not being judged for the outfit that you're wearing at the grocery store or whatever. Story 9. When I broke down because I was so fed up of being scared and anxious all the time, he said something like, "You can't be brave without being scared first." It always stuck with me that fear, no matter how overwhelming, won't last forever, and I try to see it as a chance for me to prove to myself I can fight back and try to get through this. Story 10. Just because the mentally ill person screaming at you lives in your home instead of on the streets doesn't mean their opinion is any more true. The fact that the relationships you have with some people are involuntary doesn't mean you should hold them to a lower standard than voluntary relationships. You can hold them to a higher standard. Story 12. I had been in therapy for about a decade and was talking to her about online dating. I said it was like being sucked into a whirlpool, and that there's only one small step between just playing around the edges and being sucked into the thing. She asked me why I used that example, and I said, because when I was 9, I was sucked into a whirlpool in a creek, and only survived because my brother managed to pull me out. This started a flurry of scribbling in her notebook I had not seen before. Also answered lots of things. Story 13. After going to couples counseling therapy for 6 months, one day the ex didn't show up. Ex is an abusive alcoholic who would get physically and verbally abusive. Therapist looked at me and said, he's never going to change. For some reason, that made me realize I need to move on. That was the 3rd time I filed for divorce from him. Soon after, he remarried and divorced. He continues to hit rock bottom, but has not changed. Fired for drinking on the job, vehicle repossessed, and now lives with his parents at the age of 60. Some people never change. Story 14. He showed up and set appointments with me every day for a week, then 2 a week, then 1 a week, until we reached 1 a month, which he maintained until he retired. I had an undiagnosed disease that was devastating my life, but doctors looking for horses, not zebras, kept dismissing me as having, quote, nothing wrong with me, and telling me it was all psychological. And eventually, I did become psychologically broken after a few years of not being able to get the medical help I needed. I was wanting to self-unalive. I had a self-unaliving plan, and trying to get my affairs in order was a protective factor keeping me from unaliving myself. But eventually, I ended up becoming impulsive about wanting to self-unalive. And I made an impulsive self-unaliving attempt, so impulsive that I made the attempt unconsciously without any thought to commit self-unaliving in the moment. I desperately needed help. I went to a mental health clinic, and they said I was beyond their resources and wanted to have me committed. I had 2 cats and had not made sufficient arrangements to clear out my apartment. The idea of losing my cats and the remnants of my career and my apartment by being committed did not seem like it would make me less wanting to self-unalive. I called a hotline. The guy on the hotline was on the phone with me, off and on, for what was probably most of his shift. For instance, he had me call a friend and to pick up my firearms and the items I had acquired to carry out my self-unaliving plan, then call the hotline back or he would call me. He also arranged for me to meet a therapist the next morning. He found one willing to meet me in the parking lot of his office at 7 a.m. That therapist saved my life and kept me alive during years of therapy. During the years I was working with my therapist, an immunologist finally diagnosed my disease and started treatment. She also saved my life. It was not one thing my therapist said, it was his compassion and commitment to helping me. Over the years, he taught me several tools to manage my mental health and prevent myself from wanting to self-unalive again. Even though for years my brain was still wired to see self-unaliving as a possible solution to nearly every problem. Story 15. You don't need to please everyone all the time. People who love you will not leave you because you disagree with them or do something they don't like. She nailed a lot of my behaviors back to the fact that my biological dad left when I was 9 months old. I cannot cope with perceived abandonment and will do everything in my power to keep people happy because they might leave me. Story 16. After abruptly leaving an abusive relationship where, among other things, I physically could only listen to music with headphones on, otherwise I'd get yelled at for being disrespectful and too loud. Life is your music. You were forced to mute yourself in that relationship, both literally with the music and with who you are as a person. It really made me realize how much of myself I hid away to try to appease someone else and make their life better when all it did was ruin mine. Over 3 years later, and I play music out loud all the time with a different partner who loves it just as much as I do. Story 17. At the 3rd session with our coupler's counselor, my wife and I had a brief 10-minute private session with our therapist. During my session, the therapist said, "You need to accept the possibility of a divorce. You're trying to do the right thing and be supportive, but you can't do that alone. Your wife is taking advantage of you. You can't see how unhappy you are. That will change within a year after your divorce." Yep, she was right. My wife and I agreed to divorce during the 4th session. I'm finally happy and love my life. I think this has a lot to do with resistance to change. A lot of people find comfort in just doing the same things all the time, going to the same places, and the thought of changing any of that routine just gives physical anxiety, and that even comes in the form of relationships, right? You're both unhappy, you're staying together because the thought of moving on is so scary. So I'm glad that the therapist was able to get through to this poster here, and hopefully those of you out there that are also going through it in real life kind of get the memo as well. Story 18. That the best way to get rid of cortisol is to scream, sing, or hum. Animals shake when their levels get too high to get rid of it. Our vagus nerve runs down our windpipe, so scream sing. You'll feel better. Also, that guilt is a heavy and useless emotion. Put it down like a suitcase and walk off. Story 19. Your anxiety doesn't deserve to be ignored, as well as it doesn't deserve to be justified. You can't tell yourself, "It'll be fine," all the time while anxious. That's invalidating your feelings and burying them deeper. You need to tell yourself, maybe this will happen and maybe it won't, because that's what reality is. Life is full of uncertainty, and we need to find ways to accept it, or else you'll drive yourself insane. Story 20. You have to be your own first priority if you want to show up as your best self for the people you love. I didn't really understand it at the time. How could I make myself my first priority when I knew I would be damning my siblings to a childhood of religious and emotional abuse if I chose to prioritize myself? But eventually I took the advice and moved out. I learned what happiness means. I learned how safety feels. I learned that I actually am worthy of love, including love for myself. Then I came back to be there for my siblings again, and they don't hold it against me. Our relationship is still good, and neither of them feel like I abandoned them. Although a few months after I moved out, my mom did ask me how she could mend our relationship, and I said that I'm not sure it's possible at all, but at the very least, you have to see a psychiatrist and get your explosive anger under control. You've got to be a better mother to my siblings than you were to me. Maybe then I'll even think about working on our relationship. She did go see a psychiatrist. I haven't been able to forgive her, nor have we been able to repair our relationship. We tried family therapy for a couple of months, but she kept talking over me, and I felt unsafe at therapy, so I wasn't going to do it anymore. However, even though my relationship with her didn't get better, my siblings got the chance to spend the latter half of their childhood in a healthy, loving, happy home. They have okay relationships with both parents and with me. I prioritized myself for the first time in my entire life, and suddenly my life got better, and so did the lives of the people I care about. I genuinely believed making life better for myself would mean condemning my siblings to a life of abuse where they have no adults in their lives that they can trust. It was the opposite. They gained 2 extra trusted adults because once my mom's explosive temper cooled off, my dad also started spending more time at home and stopped being a workaholic. They have less money now than they did when I was younger, but they have more love and happiness. They all feel safer. And all of this only happened because I took my therapist's advice and prioritized myself. Story 21. I think my oddly favorite duh moment one was, if you're more active at night, do what you need to then. There's no rule that everything has to be done during the day. Of course, I try to get a solid 8 hours of sleep, but where I have the opportunity to, I shift critical tasks to the middle of the night when I'm more productive and do the best work. Story 23. First therapist. Your parents don't get to decide what kind of relationship you have with your brother. That was the first big breakthrough of many. It's obvious, but it had literally never occurred to me before. Second therapist. Have you ever been evaluated for autism? Gotta tell ya, crap makes a lot more sense now. Story 24. That being a highly sensitive person is just how I'm built. It's not something that's wrong with me or something that I necessarily have to change. I just have to accept it, to learn my boundaries and needs and live accordingly. She said to think of violets and sunflowers. Both flowers, but they're different. They require different things. Violets can't be transplanted and can be more easily damaged, but they're beautiful. Sunflowers can be beat up and moved around. They're resilient. One is not necessarily better than the other. They just are. I love my therapist. Story 25. School was pretty rough for me. When I was about 13, I had multiple uncontrollable public anxiety-related breakdowns. I was self-harming and contemplating self-unaliving a lot. I got through it all out of sheer spite and anger, having to depend on myself and never being allowed to seek professional help. My parents told me I was strong enough, that people have real problems, yours aren't a big deal, you have no reason to be depressed anyways. And also the classic, what would people think if they found out you're in therapy? They'd call you crazy. Years later, I started begging my mom to let me see a therapist, which eventually she did. I think it's because she viewed me as old enough to have actual problems or something. Anyway, at the time, I blamed myself for almost everything that happened to me as a kid. I told my therapist, oh, I got bullied because I was a weirdo. I was too negative. I should have made a bigger effort to socialize. Stuff like that. I was going into detail regarding my biggest breakdown, again blaming myself, when he just stopped me and asked, and where were the adults in the situation? And it all just effing clicked. There were so many signs, ever since I was little. Obvious effing signs that I was different. I was a gifted kid. I had very specific special interests. I was always awkward and weird. I got picked on. I got left out. I never made many friends, and the adults did nothing. They let me spiral out of control. They never gave me any actual advice. They never took me seriously. But they definitely pointed out that I was, quote, too sensitive, selfish, negative, non-inviting, awkward, an overthinker, and a spoiled brat. The truth is, all this time, I was simply autistic. LMAO. Story 26. This summer, I went from very fit to couch-ridden after a really severe injury. I was doing a virtual session with my therapist and bickering about how useless I was, and my dogs were sitting with me. So I said something about being more useless around the house than they are. My therapist asked what my dogs bring into my life. Easy. Joy, humor, companionship, fun, loyalty, etc. Therapist asked, do you not bring any of those things into your spouse/friends/family's lives? Pretty much instantly ended my shame spiral. Story 27. The answer is simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. I was doing what I always do in difficult, scary situations that I don't want to deal with head on. I was overthinking and overcomplicating what I needed to do to be happy again. The answer was actually quite simple. I needed to tell my, now ex-husband, that I wanted a divorce. This statement just made it all clear to me. I was scared, so I was searching for a solution that would assuage that fear. But the truth was, there was no solution that wouldn't make this less difficult. The answer was simple, but it was okay to find it scary and difficult. Story 28. It wasn't my therapist, it was my doctor, but it was life-changing. I had been 300 plus pounds all of my adult life, and I was in for a physical, and he said to me, the first symptom of a heart attack is a heart attack. It was what caused me to change my life at age 54 and lose 110 pounds in 16 months, and I became a runner. I've run a race in all 50 states, 26 Halifax marathons, and 2 full marathons, Chicago and Boston. That one thing he said to me kicked off my decision for better health. That was 15 years ago. Just want to take a second to shout out and highlight this post. This is so inspirational, so happy to hear, and it shows that at no point in your life is it too late to make life-altering decisions like that. So glad that you're in much better health now. Ostensibly, you've increased or prolonged your life, and so that is so cool. Thank you for sharing. Story 29. It was pointed out to me that I'm amazing in crisis situations, but struggle immensely in situations that are just mildly uncomfortable or unpleasant, to the point where I'll have what was lovingly referred to as a hissy fit. So much so that I was first a critical care nurse, and now a psychiatric NP. I'm great at managing a crisis. It's where I thrive. But put me into a situation where I have to tolerate some mild discomfort? No thank you. Having this pointed out to me was life-changing. I've really been working on my mental toughness and my ability to tolerate situations that are mildly unpleasant, but certainly aren't going to kill me. People like athletes and soldiers amaze me. They have a very high tolerance for mid-moderate discomfort, and this uncanny ability to almost just tune out unpleasantness and keep going in the face of discomfort. AKA, they're very mentally tough. They don't need that adrenaline that comes from a crisis to thrive. That is now what I'm working on improving in myself. I've made great strides, but won't lie, I do still find myself becoming cranky and overly dramatic at times in situations that are mildly unpleasant or inconvenient, and need to remind myself to dial it down a bit and draw on my inner mental toughness and tell myself that no one has ever died from being mildly inconvenienced. Story 30. This was 20 plus years ago, before the world boundaries were thrown left and right. It wasn't a thing at all at the time. She was the only therapist who actually helped me, and the thing she said was, "You have no boundaries with others because yours were never respected." That blew my mind back then, and ever since, boundaries have been a theme in my head. I do have good boundaries now, for myself and for others. Story 31. The more you try to get someone to like you, the less they're going to like you because you're trying to separate them from something they hold dear, aka their dislike of you. Let them dislike you. Be neutral towards them. They're much more likely to come around if it's on their own terms. Again, to piggyback on this, you can't make everybody like you. Not everyone is going to like you, but also not everyone has good taste. So, what can we do about that? Story 32. She asked me why I was working in a job that was so extroverted when I'm clearly an introvert. She was like, "If it's so draining, why do you do it?" And all I could say was that I was good at it. So she replied, "At what cost? Can you be good at other things that don't exhaust you so much?" So I went to school for accounting and then quit my teaching job, and now I have a peaceful hybrid desk job, and I'm so much happier. I sleep better, I eat better, I stopped grinding my teeth, and my stress acne disappeared. I'm a whole new person. Story 33. She asked me to strip away the labels. Sister, daughter, fiance, friend, editor, writer, volunteer, liberal, feminist, runner. Take them all away. What's left? I said, nothing. She said, no, it's you. You're smart and funny and loving and weird and silly and so many other things. And the you who does nothing else but exist has inherent self-worth. And it clicked. I finally stopped believing I was only as good as the things I could do or accomplish. Story 34. In grief counseling, I was feeling overwhelming guilt because when their father died, I completely lost it. I felt I wasn't there enough for my children. My therapist said, when the airplane is going down, you put your mask on first. This is no different. You can't help your children until you've helped yourself. It literally was a huge turning point for all of us. Story 35. I grew up as a gifted child, which I'm obviously aware of the privilege that comes with, and I'm thankful for it. It also comes with huge burnouts, stress, and insane pressure to meet the expectations I never even had a say in setting. I was in a session with my therapist, and he said, quote, you aren't supposed to know what you're doing. You aren't supposed to know what you want. You shouldn't know anything about what your life should look like. That's the entire point of being alive. You go through different stages until you find your purpose. It's not some big philosophical journey where you race to find the meaning of life. Your purpose could be as simple as smiling at a stranger. That person decides to stay another day, and 50 years later, his or her grandson or granddaughter finds the cure for cancer. You can't think too deeply into life, because that's not what we're supposed to do with our time. It will just drive you insane because we aren't meant to know what the reasons for being alive are. With that being said, just do what makes you happy. Take classes you enjoy, not what will make you rich. Talk to people that make you happy. Work jobs that you find rewarding. At the end of the day, the person who loves their life is so much richer than a billionaire. If you enjoy something, follow it. If you love someone, keep them in your life. If someone makes you happier, allow change to take place. You are your own person. You don't need to be what your parents think you can be. You don't need to be who your peers think you should be. You don't need to be who your teachers or mentors think you should be. Are you capable of all those things? Of course you are. But is that what you actually want? You've been told your entire life you're special, smart, beautiful. That's all true. But at the end of the day, just because you're all those things doesn't mean you have to live a particular type of life. The only person that's expectations you need to meet are your own. If the people in your life truly love you, they'll support whatever makes you happy. You have the potential to be great is the most backhanded compliment you could ever receive. You're already great. Now it's time for you to decide what being great means to you. It's all up to you. You don't owe anyone anything. It's your life. Do what makes you feel like you lived out your purpose. And not everyone's purpose is a career and family. Live a life you can lay on your deathbed and say to yourself, I did good. That's all that really matters. I remember it word for word. Changed absolutely everything. Story 36. OCD therapy. So a little bit different than traditional therapy. I was describing to my therapist all the things my OCD requires that I do during my daily routine. She said, if this were regular therapy and if you were a minor describing these things as something your parents require, I would be required to call CPS for abuse. Really put into perspective how different my life is from people who do not suffer from OCD. Really motivated me on my recovery. Story 37. So, as a psychologist that works with patients, it seems like people have good or horrible experiences with therapy here on this Reddit thread. Just want to remind everyone that the best predictor of who does well in therapy is found in the answer. Do I like the person I'm talking to? If the answer is no, the chance of success drops significantly. If you tried therapy before and it didn't work, it might have been a bad fit. Try again and again. You're worth trying for. Story 38. Some therapists drilled two concepts into my head that changed the way I think. You cannot control what others do to you. You can only control how you respond to what others do to you. And when trying to understand my dad in my childhood, you cannot understand or rationalize a psychopath. You can never and will never understand or relate. Totally agree with that first quote. Half of life are the things that happen to you, right? Things that you can't control. And the other half is how you respond to those things. So if you had plans to do something outside today and it's raining, okay, shoot. You can't control the fact that it's raining, but you can control whether or not you throw a temper tantrum or find a cool indoor activity to do or something that you can still do outside in the rain. So just focus on the things that you can control and don't stress over things that happen to you that are out of your control. Story 39. Either way, you're making a choice, and you do get to choose. Super religious, stuck in a marriage that was abusive, and I didn't feel I could leave. I didn't have a choice. I thought the marital bond was unbreakable, and if I left, I would automatically be resigned to hell because I was doing something so bad and consciously choosing to do it. While my therapist was a Christian, and honestly, I think he was nudging me to stay, but not because I didn't have a choice, but because he wanted me to feel like I chose it. When I truly realized and understood that I actually did have a choice and I wasn't just stuck and powerless, I chose to leave. My life has been exponentially better. Story 40. Bide your time. This has helped with my anxiety in so many ways. It doesn't matter if that time is 2 minutes, 2 weeks, or 2 months. It's okay to just not make a decision on something yet. I use this all the time still, and it really relieves the pressure of having to have everything figured out in that second. I can take 2 weeks to decide and not worry for the entirety because I truly don't have to decide until that moment comes. Usually, with more time and less pressure, the answer is pretty obvious. Story 41. I wasn't in therapy, but in a parenting class. The advice was, you can put the baby down. It seems simple, but when you have a screaming baby and you've tried to figure out what's wrong, you've invested a lot of effort into problem solving and gotten no result. It's natural to want to double your efforts and try extra hard to solve the problem. But in reality, it may be that there is no solution. The baby's just crying. You can walk away and take a break and try again in 5 minutes. You can apply this philosophy to a lot of things in life, it turns out. Story 42. I have this habit of berating myself and saying horrible things about myself. My therapist told me that his next patient has a lot of the same issues I do, and he would like me to stick around so I can tell him what a piece of crap he is. I was like, why the F would I do that? That's horrible. And he pointed out that I had a visceral reaction to the thought of verbally abusing a complete stranger, but I do it to myself every day. It helped me get to a place where I could see myself as a person that deserves compassion and grace even from myself. Story 43. What would happen if you just didn't? This really made me look at my responses to things that are stressful. What if I didn't immediately jump in to save my mom and dad and brother? What if I didn't immediately get angry and frustrated at X, Y, and Z? What if I didn't make other people's problems my problems? Holy cow, changed my life. Story 44. More or less, showering, washing your hair, and brushing your teeth actually entails a lot of steps. When you think about it, you're already really burned out. So, with your ADHD and autism causing executive dysfunction, of course they become overwhelming tasks. Beating yourself up about not being able to handle that level of self-care doesn't help anyone and doesn't get you any closer to doing better. Let's talk about other things you can do to help with maintenance until you can work your way back up to regular functioning levels. I now have disposable toothbrushes, baby wipes, and dry shampoo for when things get bad and/or I'm in more physical pain than usual. Story 45. I've been struggling with a terrible boss at work. Underqualified, immature, abusive, gaslighting, manipulative, the whole thing. After about a year in therapy, my therapist said one sentence that changed everything. You still see the boss as a person. It was almost 24 hours later, with that sentence repeating on a loop in my head, that I realized that my boss had never seen me as a person. That helped me realize that what was happening was real and not good, so I went to HR, who took it seriously and stepped in to help. Story 46. Neglect is a form of abuse. I thought that since my parents clothed me, fed me, sometimes took me to the doctor, gave me money when I desperately needed it, and didn't hurt or assault me, that I couldn't have been abused. It was a effing eye-opening experience to hear that parents are supposed to fulfill more needs than just survival. She said it, and I said something like, yeah, sure, I guess, but not really. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks that she was right. Everyone, kids especially, need more than having their base-level survival needs met. You need people in your life that you can depend on, that make you feel safe, that are present and engaged, and that don't make you grovel or feel guilty for every scrap of food or modicum of affection begrudgingly bestowed on you. Never having a moment where you feel safe or like you can relax or like you can count on someone else results in growing up to be anxious, bad at relationships, bad at advocating for yourself, and bad at seeing yourself as worthy of love, respect, or success. You're taught from an early age that your wants and needs don't matter, so it's easier to just not have any. Story 47. That's what avoidant people do. Some context. My ex and I were in couples therapy because I felt like I was crazy for the action she was taking. Ghosted me after 5 years after we split. No contact and no closure. I told her about this and that was her response. It clicked that this was indeed an avoidant person. Avoided all responsibility for any wrongdoing on her part and did not want to grow as a person. Best thing my therapist ever said to me. Story 48. Why are you continuing to give your abuser access to you? They moved on by cheating on you with someone else and destroyed your mental health on the way out. No matter what they tell you, they don't need you. They don't even want you. They want what you give them. That's how narcissists work. They suck every bit of joy out of you, and when they aren't getting it anymore, they throw you away and move on to the next victim. Shut that man out, and let yourself heal. He doesn't deserve you, and you do not deserve to be abused. He will never change, and it's time to move on and grieve the person you loved, because they're dead to you now. Story 49. You shouldn't speak with your mother. It was something I wanted to do for years upon years, but never felt right about doing due to societal norms and trying to set an example for my younger brother. I even tried to get her to come to therapy with me, but she denied because I would try to expose her. When I finally heard someone say what I had been thinking, I was so overwhelmed. I took her advice and cut all communication with her 4 years ago. In the time since then, I felt such an increase in my overall mental health and have been able to stop abusing alcohol and drugs. Yes, I still drink, but not nearly as much as I used to. Story 50. Not to me, but here's in the show Couples Therapy. Paraphrasing here. Client says, my mom has this blueprint for my life, so that I can avoid her worries, so that I can avoid her struggles, so I won't have the same worries and anxieties she had. Therapist goes, but all the anxieties are built into the blueprint. Head exploded when I realized how I was following the good plan recommended by my parents. Story 51. I had a hard time because I kept remembering all the negative things that had happened, but had a hard time recalling happy memories. I was very distraught. He said, happy memories don't help you survive. Bad memories do. They help you know what not to do. Now, from here on out, if you have a good laugh or memory, just write it in your phone. Now I have a notes app full of happy memories that I look at when I'm having a tough time. Story 52. I'm a hospital chaplain. I was worried that I don't care enough because at the end of the day, I'm able to relax, have fun with friends, and enjoy myself despite the extreme tragedy I experience every day at work. She asked what would happen if I did spend all my time thinking about and grieving over my patients. Then she said, would the suffering stop? It was powerful for me to hear and really helped how I view my work and career. Story 53. Feelings aren't good or bad. They're neutral. There's no feeling you could possibly have that would make you a bad person. My therapist said this recently, and it's become my mantra whenever I'm stuck ruminating and placing judgment on my own feelings. Helps me to have acceptance and snap out of my rumination cycle and move on. Story 54. When trying to deal with my husband, who has lots of trauma and mental health issues, I said something like, I don't understand why he's overreacting this way. She dropped this bomb. He's reacting perfectly normal and as expected, for someone who's experienced the trauma he's experienced. My brain imploded. It totally shifted how I view my husband. I suddenly understood him so much more and could now reframe my approach with him. Story 55. Had a big problem with overthinking my entire life and thinking of possible ways of everything going wrong. This gave huge anxiety, specifically when it came to getting pregnant. I was creating 1,000 scenarios for miscarriages day after day. My therapist told me, you're already suffering for something that didn't happen. If it does happen, you'll suffer again. What do you prefer, to suffer once and if it happens, and none if it doesn't, or to suffer twice if it happens and once if it doesn't? I know it's not that big of an insight, but it made me realize that I was always choosing a sum of more suffering because I believed it would prepare me for bad things. Truth is, if something bad happens, nothing will make me feel prepared, and I will have to live through it anyway. So I chose less suffering, and it kind of worked. My anxiety dropped enormously because I finally realized that it was entirely my choice. Story 56. I have two. I was having a hard time taking breaks at work. I'm also very process-oriented. One day, he called taking a break a step in the process, and I welcomed break-taking with open arms. Before he said that, I saw taking a break as an interruption in my process, but now I understand it's a part of the process. I'm autistic, and my workday sucks the life out of me because I feel like I have to meet everyone we're there at. I put so much energy into communicating in the ways non-autistic people usually expect. My therapist said, how often do you meet yourself where you're at? After that session, I asked my boss if we could do our one-on-ones over instant messaging. We have lots of face-to-face meetings, and instant messaging for just one of them is a nice break from being hyper-aware of my body language. Story 57. I got her laughing so hard she was crying. She laughed and wheezed until she got it all out, took a great big old breath, and said, that was so funny. Oh my God, you are funny. Now, to tell it all to me again as if it happened to you. And I had this moment of existential terror. I can tell the story about how I accidentally got left behind at a roadside attraction in a way that makes people just fall over from the humor of it. But it's a effing awful story from tits to tail when you stop trying to be funny all the time. Story 58. If you did something you feel guilty about, it's okay. You can apologize and you can change if you want to. If someone else did something you feel guilty about, it's okay. It's not your fault. Your version of love is climbing over this wall and thinking it's going to be safety and comfort on the other side. Her version of love is watching you run and claw at the wall she's building while it only gets taller. She wants you to fail. It's your choice, but most people don't survive that kind of love. Story 59. When I was 14, I spent 6 months in long-term mental hospital. As part of this program, you had to earn points every day by doing basic things in order to level up. Leveling up gets you discharged when you reach level 5. These were things like going to group, keeping your room clean, eating 3 meals a day, etc. My entire day, I would refuse to do things all the time, which would lead to me not getting my points. I would just sit my ass down and not go to group, or to see my therapist, or to go to meals. At one point, towards the end of my stay, I was working really hard to discharge and go home. In a therapy session one day, I was arguing with my therapist that I was ready to go home because I hadn't refused in a week. She told me that I needed to be consistent. I asked her how long I needed to be consistent for, and she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "Do you hear yourself?" I realized that the reason I was still there, and had been there for so much longer than everyone else, I was looking at it like it was a formula. I wasn't trying to make a lasting change. I was just trying to put on a show that I could do what they wanted me to do. Story 60. She asked me one day what my goals for our sessions were, because she thought we were not making any progress. She then said she perceived that I was hungover or possibly intoxicated at our evening sessions. At the time, I knew I had a problem with drinking for years, but didn't want to address it. She forced me to confront the issue, as well as the issue of my unmedicated depression. I started on a road to quitting drinking, 7.5 years sober, and acknowledging that I needed help for managing ADHD and depression. It isn't fixed, but I'm so grateful for her candor. Story 61. For context, I'm an only child, so when COVID hit, I had, and sometimes still do, have really bad separation anxiety. So I went to my therapist and I tell her everything about life, etc. And when I stop, she thinks for a moment and says, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me know if I'm right, okay? I nod and she says, I think the reason you care about your friends so much is because they're like family to you. You have no one else to be around besides your parents who don't relate to you as much as you rely on your friends as family. And I just effing broke down. Story 62. I heard this from someone else. They were complaining about their life to their therapist. I hate where I live. I don't like any job I have because of my parents' example, etc. The therapist was like, So what are you going to do about it? She was livid. Did you hear what I said? My parents did this and that. I grew up with this. So now I live in this awful place with this awful job. The therapist says, So what are you going to do about it? This went around and around until she was about to walk out, but finally it sunk in, and she says it changed her life. Story 63. As an overachiever / never enough type of student who also worked for the university while completing my undergraduate degree, she asked me, Are you an average student on this campus? And when I didn't get what she was getting at, she followed up with, Is there anyone else here doing all of what you're doing in a day? Maybe not super applicable to everyone, but it helped me to realize I didn't need to keep adding to my plate to be seen as doing enough. Story 64. I feel this. You can hurl 100 insults at me, and the only one that will hurt is the one I believe. A dramatic family member called my husband a horrible person, emphasis on the horrible, loudly at an auction because my husband won the bid on a family heirloom that others wanted. My husband genuinely laughed very hard because he knew how absurd this insult was. I personally would have been very embarrassed. Months later, my brother, his spouse, and all of our kids got t-shirts printed that said my husband was a horrible person as a surprise for my husband's birthday. We even got my husband his own that said, I'm a horrible person, and we all wore them on the boardwalk at the beach together in celebration of my husband's birthday. It was one of the most funny and memorable birthdays for all of us. People would comment as walking by, he doesn't seem horrible, or even ask, what did he do to be horrible? It really taught me and our kids how such insults are meaningless if we choose to put them in perspective. If my mean-spirited relative had any idea how much fun we had over his insult, I'm sure he would have wished he never would have said it. Story 65. I have a friend that, in my presence, called another person and started ranting how bad her life was and how the other person should really help her out and be understanding. When my friend hung up, she said, I know the woman lost her husband last week, but can't she understand that helping me will give her something to do instead of be sad? So I asked her, if she just lost her husband, shouldn't you have asked how she's doing before asking her for a favor? And my friend said, no, I don't need her to get all weepy, and she doesn't want to either. Who does? So I said, well, I think most people would like to be asked how they're doing. And my friend just said again that she didn't think so and really just wanted some help and not hear all those problems. This is the same friend who regularly posts on Facebook about not being understood and people not caring enough about her problems to help her or ask if she wants help. I never heard someone be so honest about being uninterested in other things. It did explain a lot, and it was that final straw that made me withdraw care for her. LOL. Story 66. That I was more addicted to the breaks and deep breathing than I was to the nicotine. Over 1 year without smoking and watching my dad die of lung cancer due to a lifetime of smoking. Story 67. You don't need to please everyone all the time. People who love you will not leave you because you disagree with them or do something they don't like. She nailed a lot of my behaviors back to the fact my biological dad left when I was 9 months old. I cannot cope with perceived abandonment and will do everything in my power to keep people happy, because they might leave me.